The night was cold, and the wind moved through the broken city like a ghost. Empty houses stood like shadows, and the streets were covered with dust and silence. A single human man walked carefully, his boots pressing against stones and glass. His name was Daniel, and he had traveled far across this ruined world, searching for supplies. He was tired, hungry, and carrying only a small bag with water and food. The city had once been alive, filled with lights and voices, but now it was only ruins. Windows were broken, walls had collapsed, and strange symbols of war were painted on the stones. Daniel looked around carefully, always listening, always afraid that patrols or thieves might appear. The air smelled of smoke and cold metal, and every sound felt louder than it should be. He had learned long ago that silence in places like this was dangerous. Because silence meant eyes were watching, then he heard it. A sound so soft he thought it was the wind at first. It was a whisper. Weak and trembling, Daniel stopped, his hand moving to the small knife at his belt. Again the sound came from the shadows of a broken doorway. It was not wind, not an animal. It was a voice, a small voice, almost broken. "Father," it said. Weak as a breath, Daniel froze, his heart beating fast. Slowly, he stepped closer, his eyes adjusting to the dark, and there she was, a small, alien girl. No older than 7 or 8, sitting on the cold ground. Her skin was pale blue, her thin arms covered with dirt, and her silver hair tangled across her face. Her eyes were large, glowing faintly in the dark, and they were filled with fear. She looked up at him, trembling, her lips dry and cracked. "Please," she whispered again. "Father." Daniel felt something inside him break. She was not his child. He had never seen her before, but the way she spoke, the way her body shook, it was clear she was desperate. He stepped back for a moment, unsure. Why was she here alone? Where was her real family? Why was she calling a stranger father? The girl tried to stand, but her legs were weak. She stumbled forward, almost falling, and grabbed his coat with her tiny hand. Her voice cracked. "Pretend, just for a day." "Please." Daniel stared down at her, his throat dry. He wanted to pull away, to keep walking, to stay out of trouble. But her eyes were filled with tears, and in them he saw not only fear, but hope. Hope that someone, anyone, not leave her. Around them, the street was empty, but Daniel knew the danger. He had heard whispers of patrols searching for children like her, alone, abandoned. Unclaimed these were taken, and no one saw them again. The man's chest grew heavy, his mind fighting against his heart. If he took her, he would be hunted. If he left her, she would die. And yet she looked at him as if he was the only person in the world who could save her. The girl pressed her forehead against his arm and whispered again, softer, "Please be my father, just for one day." Her words cut deeper than any blade. Daniel knelt slowly, his rough hand touching her shoulder. She flinched at first, then leaned into his touch like she had been waiting for it her whole life. Her small body was cold, shaking, and so light he knew she had not eaten in days. "Why me?" he asked in a low voice. Her glowing eyes lifted to his face. "Because you stopped," she whispered. Everyone else walked away. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment. The wind howled through the empty street, carrying the sound of distant footsteps, patrols, maybe, or scavengers. He did not know. But he knew one thing clearly now: if he left her, her whisper would haunt him forever. He sighed deeply and pulled his coat around her shoulders. "All right," he said softly. "Just for today, I'll be your father." The girl's lips curved into the faintest smile, but her tears still rolled down. She clung to his arm tighter, her small hands gripping like chains of trust. The silent streets seemed less empty now, though the danger still waited in the dark. Daniel looked around once more, then guided her out of the doorway. The night was still long. and tomorrow would bring questions he could not yet answer. But for this moment, in this silent street, a lost girl had found a father, even if only for a day. The night pressed heavier. As Daniel led the small alien girl away from the broken doorway, her thin hand clung to his coat as if letting go would mean death. Every step echoed softly on the cracked stones, and Daniel's eyes never stopped searching the shadows. He knew. The city was not safe, and the further they went, the louder his heart pounded. The girl walked beside him with weak legs, her breath shaky. Her silver hair caught the pale light of the ruined lamps above. Now and then she stumbled, and Daniel slowed his pace. He wanted to ask questions, but her trembling told him she was already close to breaking. Finally, when they reached a quieter corner where walls shielded them from the main street, he stopped. He crouched down so his eyes met hers. Her glowing eyes, large and bright, looked up at him with fear and hope mixed together. "Tell me," he whispered, "why did you call?" "Me father, why not just ask for help?" Her lips moved, but no words came. Tears gathered at the edges of her eyes. When she finally spoke, her voice cracked like dry wood. "Because only children with fathers are safe," she whispered. Daniel frowned, his chest tightening. "What do you mean?" he asked. She looked around quickly, as if even the shadows could listen. Then she leaned closer. Her words rushed, but quiet. "They take the ones without family," she said. "The patrols, the men in dark armor. They come at night, they search." For children alone, her small hands gripped his sleeve tighter. "If they see me alone, they will take me too, and no one comes back." Daniel's jaw clenched. He had heard rumors of strange roundups, but he never thought they would target children. Now it made sense, the silence of the city. The empty houses, the missing faces. This was not just war. It was something worse, something cruel and hidden. The girl wiped her tears with the back of her hand. Her voice shook again. "I tried to hide. I tried to run, but they are everywhere. They say orphans are worthless, that no one will miss them. But if you have a father, they leave you. They do." Not ask questions. Her eyes rose to his again, wide and begging. "So please, just for one day, be my father. If they see me with you, they will not take me." Daniel's throat was dry. He had faced hunger, storms, and dangers of this world, but nothing felt as heavy as this moment. The girl's plea was not only about safety, it was about belonging. About needing someone to stand in front of her. He tried to speak, but his voice felt stuck. Her small hand tugged his sleeve again. "You do not have to stay forever. Just today, just until it is safe." He studied her face, the dirt on her cheeks. The way her lips trembled when she tried to be brave. She was strong to have survived this long. But even the strongest child cannot live alone forever. Something inside him, long buried, stirred like an old wound, memories of his own daughter. Back on Earth came rushing back, a daughter he had lost in the chaos of war. Her laughter, her tiny hand in his, the night he never saw her again. Daniel swallowed hard, pushing the pain down. The girl's eyes shined as she waited for his answer. The wind whistled through the ruins like a warning. Daniel finally placed his hand on her small shoulder, steady and firm. "All right," he said. Softly, "I will be your father for today." Her lips parted, a small sound escaping, half sob. Half relief, she leaned forward and pressed her forehead against his chest. For the first time in who knows how long, she let herself breathe. Daniel stood still, his rough hands unsure, but slowly he placed one arm around her. The hug was awkward, but real, and her small body clung to him like a lifeline. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice almost lost in the wind. He said nothing, because his heart already felt too heavy, but inside he knew this was not just pretending. Not for him. He could not walk away now. Not after hearing her plea. Not after seeing her tears far down the street. The sound of boots striking stone echoed through the night. Daniel's head snapped up, his body tensing. The girl froze in his arms, her breath catching. "They're coming," she whispered. Her voice trembling with terror. Daniel gripped her hand tight. Pulling her with him into the shadows of a broken wall, he pressed a finger to his lips, telling her to stay silent. The patrol passed slowly. Armored figures with glowing visors. Scanning the dark, their heavy boots shook the ground. Their weapons gleaming under faint lights. Daniel's heart thundered as one of them stopped. Turning its head toward their hiding place, the girl squeezed his hand so hard it hurt her body. Shaking for a long breath, the soldier stared, then moved on. The group disappearing into the distance. When silence returned, Daniel exhaled slowly. The girl leaned against him, whispering again, "See, if you were not here, they would have taken me." Her voice carried both fear and certainty. Daniel looked down at her, his mind torn. He had promised only for a day. But deep inside, he already knew the truth. The child's plea had reached a place he thought was dead, and once a heart wakes, it does not go back to sleep. The night had grown colder, and the city seemed to hold its breath. Daniel held the girl's hand as they moved deeper into the ruins. Her steps were small, her body weak, but she forced herself to keep up. Every shadow felt alive, every sound carried danger. The patrols were near, and Daniel knew if they were caught, there would be no mercy. The streets twisted like a maze, broken walls and collapsed towers rising around them. Once these streets were filled with laughter. Now they were only graves of stone. Daniel guided her through narrow alleys where the light of the patrol lamps could not reach. The girl pressed close to him, her glowing eyes darting left and right. Her whispers shook with fear. "They know. They can smell me." Daniel stopped at a broken wall and crouched low, pulling her down with him. He peered around the corner, his breath steady but his heart fast. A group of armored soldiers marched down the main street, their boots echoing, their helmets shone faint red lights, scanning the darkness like hungry eyes. Daniel held the girl close, his hand covering her mouth gently. She trembled, but stayed quiet, her tears falling against his hand. The soldiers passed, but one of them broke away. It stopped, turned, and walked slowly toward the alley where Daniel and the girl hid. The sound of its heavy boots grew louder, closer. Daniel's grip on his knife tightened. He knew he could never fight them all, but if this one discovered them, he would have to try. The girl squeezed his arm, her tiny fingers digging into him, her glowing eyes locked onto his face, as if asking, "Will you protect me?" Daniel nodded slightly, telling her without words that he would. The soldier stepped into the alley, its visor glowing, its head tilting as if listening. The silence stretched too long. Then, suddenly, a sound echoed from another street of metal. Door slamming shut, the soldier turned sharply and left. Chasing the noise with the others, Daniel let out a slow breath, his shoulders heavy with relief. He turned to the girl, brushing her tangled hair from her face. "We must move," he whispered. "They will come back." She nodded weakly, but her legs shook as she tried to stand. Daniel lifted her into his arms, her small body light as feathers. She buried her face in his chest, whispering, "Father, don't let them take me." The words struck his heart like a blade and a blessing at once. He tightened his hold on her and moved quickly through the ruins. The city was not only dangerous because of soldiers. Scavengers prowled to men and women who would sell a child for food. Daniel knew these streets. He had passed through them before, but carrying a child made every step louder. Every turn riskier. He ducked into a broken building, its roof half gone, its walls cracked but still standing. Inside, it smelled of mold and ash. He placed the girl down and knelt beside her. Listening, she shivered and looked up, Why are they hunting children? What do they want? Daniel had no answer. Only rumors that the soldiers took them for experiments, for labor, or for reasons darker than words. He looked at her fragile frame, her glowing eyes, her trembling lips. Whatever the reason, he could not allow her to be taken. I don't know, he admitted softly. But they will not take you. The girl nodded. Though her fear still filled the room, she crawled closer, leaning against him. Her voice broke again. When you held me, they did not look too close. They believe you are my father. Daniel stared at the ruined floor. The weight of her words pressing into him, he had promised only for a day. But already his heart felt bound to her, suddenly. A sound shattered, the stillness glass breaking, voices shouting. Daniel grabbed the girl's hand and pulled her toward the back of the building. Through a broken window, they crawled into another. Allie's shouts grew louder, red lights sweeping the darkness. They're here. One voice yelled. Daniel ran, pulling her along, his boots slipping on wet stone. The girl's breath came in sharp sobs, but she kept running. Behind them, the soldiers' lights cut through the shadows, growing closer. Daniel turned sharply into a passage barely wide enough for one person. He shoved the girl forward first, her small body squeezing through the gap. Then he followed, scraping his shoulders against jagged stone. Behind them, the soldiers' boots. "Thundered, run!" Daniel urged, his voice low but fierce. The girl stumbled. But he pushed her forward, never letting her fall. The passage opened into an old square, its fountain broken, water long gone. Daniel pulled her behind a fallen statue and pressed his back to the stone. The soldiers' voices echoed closer, beams of red light sweeping across the square. The girl pressed against him, her body trembling violently. Daniel held her tight. His knife ready, though his hand shook. If they were found, he would fight until his last breath. He felt her whisper against his chest. "Don't die, father. Don't die." The soldiers' lights moved slowly, searching every corner, one beam. Passed close to their hiding place, lingering, Daniel's breath stopped. But then, as if fate itself turned its head, the light shifted away. The soldiers cursed and moved on, their boots fading into the distance. Silence returned. Heavy and broken only by the girl's soft sobs. Daniel lowered his knife and held her tighter. Her words still echoed in his ears, words spoken from fear, but filled with truth. "Don't die, father." He looked at her, and for the first time in years, his heart no longer felt empty. The chase had not ended, it had only begun. But one thing was clear. He was no longer running only for himself. Now, he was running. For her asterisk, the ruined square grew quiet again. But Daniel knew silence was only a thin cover. The soldiers would circle back, and when they did, they would search with sharper eyes. He could not keep running with the girl forever. Sooner or later, someone would stop them and ask who she was. And if he had no proof, both of them would be lost. The girl clung to his arm as they moved into the back streets, her glowing eyes lifted to his face, filled with fear, but also with trust. "Where do we go now?" she whispered. Daniel's voice was low and steady, though inside, he felt the storm. "To someone who can help us," he said, "if he is still alive." The man he thought of was not a soldier or a leader, but a survivor like him. A clever man who once worked in records, who learned to forge papers and identities when the war tore laws apart. His name was Merrick, and he lived hidden in the shadows, selling hope to those who could pay. Daniel had not seen him in years. But if anyone could create proof that the girl was his daughter, it was Marique. The streets grew narrower, darker, the air thicker with smoke. Daniel guided the girl down twisted alleys, past burned-out homes and broken signs. Once they heard footsteps too close, and Daniel pushed her into a pile of rubble, covering her with his body until the sound faded. She shook under his arms but did not cry. her silence proof of how long she had been hiding alone at last. They reached an old iron door hidden behind collapsed bricks. Daniel knocked 3 times, paused, then twice more. A code from long ago. The door creaked open just a little, and a sharp eye peeked out. "Daniel," a rough voice said, full of suspicion, "I thought you were dead." "Not yet," Daniel answered quietly. "I need your help." The door opened wider, and Merrick stood there. His clothes worn, but his eyes still sharp as knives. He looked at Daniel, then at the girl. Hiding behind his arm, his eyebrows lifted, a mix of surprise and annoyance. "You bring me a child. What is this?" Daniel stepped inside, pulling the girl with him. The door shut behind them with a heavy thud. Inside was a small room filled with papers, ink, and machines stolen from old offices. Stacks of documents lay on tables, and the smell of ink and dust filled the air. "I need a paper," Daniel said firmly. "One that says, 'She is mine.'" Merrick crossed his arms, his eyes narrowing. "You? A father?" he said with a laugh that had no joy. "What game is this?" The girl pressed closer to Daniel, whispering, "Please, don't leave me." Her small voice cut through the tension like a blade. Merrick's smile faded, his eyes studying her glowing face. "You know what they do with orphans," he said at last, quieter. "The soldiers take them. No one sees them again. You want me to risk my life for this?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "I don't ask for free," he said. Dropping a small pouch on the table, inside were ration tokens, tools, and the last of his tradable goods. Merrick stared at the pouch, then at Daniel's eyes. Finally, he sighed. "You always were a fool, but maybe a brave fool." He moved to his desk. Pulling papers and stamps, the machines clicked and rattled as he began his work. The girl watched with wide eyes, not understanding. Only knowing her life depended on the ink and marks Merrick pressed onto the paper. Daniel stood beside her, his hand never leaving her shoulder. Time stretched heavy, every minute a risk. Every second a chance for patrols to burst through the door. Finally Merrick held up a folded paper, its edges marked with seals and stamps. "Here," he said, handing it to Daniel. "This says she is yours. Name and blood." It will fool most patrols unless they look too deep. Daniel took the paper carefully, sliding it into his coat. The girl looked at Merrick with quiet awe, her lips trembling as she whispered. "Thank you, Merrick," only grunted, waving them toward the door. "Go. Before you bring soldiers to my doorstep." But as Daniel opened the door, a sound froze them all. Boots, heavy and many, marching outside. The girl's hand clamped onto Daniel's sleeve, her glowing eyes wide with terror. Merrick cursed under his breath, pulling them back inside. "You led them here," he hissed, his eyes full of fear. No. Daniel whispered, "They've been following since the square." The boots stopped outside the door, voices muttering. The girl buried her face against Daniel, whispering, "They know. They know." Merrick looked at him, panic rising. "If they come in, the papers won't matter. You'll be dead before they read them." Daniel tightened his grip on the girl, his voice low but firm. "Then we must act like she is mine. Not only on paper, but with every breath." The soldiers knocked hard, the door shaking under their fists. "Open." A voice demanded, rough and cold. Merrick's face paled. Daniel looked at the girl. Her small, glowing eyes stared at him, desperate but brave. "Remember," he whispered to her, "you are my daughter now." She nodded quickly, her tears shining. But her jaw set. The door began to creak as soldiers forced it open. Merrick whispered sharply, "You have only seconds. Make them believe." Daniel pulled the girl into his arms, holding her close as the door burst wide and soldiers stormed in. Red lights swept the room, weapons raised, voices sharp. The girl clung to his chest, whispering into his shirt, "Father, don't let them take me." Her voice rang true, so raw, so desperate, that even Merrick's hard eyes softened for a moment. And Daniel, holding her tighter, felt the weight of his promise grow heavier. The papers were in his coat, but in this moment, paper was not enough. It would be his heart, his voice, and her courage that would decide their fate. The soldiers stormed into Marek's hidden room like wolves. Their boots shaking the floor, red beams from their visors swept across the walls. Stopping on every paper, every tool, every face, Daniel pulled the girl close, his arms wrapped tight around her small body. She buried her face against his chest, whispering again and again, "Father, Father," her voice trembling but clear. One soldier stepped forward, his armor black and heavy, his voice cold. "You, human," he barked. "Who is this child?" Daniel's heart pounded, but he forced his voice steady. "She is mine," he said, his tone calm but firm. "My daughter." The soldier's visor flickered with faint light as it scanned them. It paused, then held out a gloved hand. "Papers." Daniel reached slowly into his coat and brought out the folded document Marek had forged. He handed it over with careful fingers, hiding the shake in his hand. The soldier opened the paper, scanning the seals and stamps. The silence in the room stretched long, every breath heavy. The girl clung tighter, her small hand gripping Daniel's sleeve like a lifeline. Another soldier stepped closer, his weapon humming. "These papers can be forged. Prove the child is yours." Daniel froze, his chest tightening. He had expected them to doubt, but not to test. The soldier crouched, visor glowing as he looked directly at the girl. "Tell me," he said, his voice sharp, "what is your father's name?" The girl's breath caught, her glowing eyes wide with terror. Daniel's stomach twisted. She did not know his name. If she said nothing, they would be lost. If she said the wrong thing, they would be taken. He wanted to speak for her, but if he did, they would know it was false. The girl swallowed hard, her eyes never leaving Daniel's face. Her lips parted and her voice cracked. "Father is Daniel," she whispered, the sound weak but true. Daniel's heart stopped. How had she known? How had she guessed? The soldier tilted his head. Not satisfied. "Describe him." The soldier demanded, "What does your father do for you?" The girl's eyes filled with tears, but her voice grew steadier. "He holds my hand when I am scared." She said, "He covers me with his coat when I am cold. He does not walk away, even when everyone else does." Her small voice echoed. In the room, each word raw and sharp. The soldiers shifted, their weapons lowering slightly. The one holding the paper stared at her, then at Daniel. For a long breath, no one moved. Finally, the soldier straightened and handed the paper back. "She is his," he said flatly, turning to the others. "We move." Relief flooded through Daniel so strong, he almost collapsed. The girl pressed her face deeper against his chest. Sobbing quietly, the soldiers turned, their boots striking the floor as they filed out. The door slammed shut behind them, leaving silence heavy in the room. Marek exhaled, his face pale. "That child saved you," he muttered, shaking his head. Daniel looked down at her, his arms still wrapped around her. Her small body trembled, but her voice whispered against his shirt, "I told the truth. Father, I told them." Daniel's throat burned, his chest tight. He brushed her hair back gently, his rough hand soft against her face. "You were brave," he whispered. "Braver than me." Her glowing eyes lifted to his, wet with tears, but bright with something else, trust. For the first time since he found her, Daniel realized she was no longer just pretending. In her heart, he was already her father. Marek moved closer, his voice low. "You fooled them this time. But the papers won't hold forever if they test you again. If they take blood, if they search deeper, you'll be finished." Daniel nodded, his jaw set. "Then we must leave the city." Marek frowned. "Leave? There are checkpoints everywhere, soldiers at every gate. You will never pass. Daniel tightened his hold on the girl. I don't have a choice. The girl's small hand reached up, touching his chin gently, her voice soft but sure. We'll pass. Father, we have to. Daniel felt the weight of her words press into his heart. It was no longer about survival for him alone. It was about her life, her future. And he knew he would walk through fire if that was what it took. Outside, the sound of distant boots echoed again. Daniel looked at Marek, his voice steady. Can you help us one more time? Marek hesitated, then sighed. You always ask for too much, Daniel, but maybe this time it is worth it. He turned to his desk again, pulling out more stamps, more seals. If you want to leave the city, you will need not only papers, but courage stronger than iron. The girl leaned against Daniel, her eyes, finally closing from exhaustion. Her small whisper slipped into the silence. Don't let go, Father. Daniel kissed her tangled hair softly, his eyes burning. I won't, he promised. Not now, not ever. The night had nearly broken into dawn. But the city remained dark. The streets were quiet now. Yet Daniel knew silence never lasted long. Patrols would return. Questions would rise, and their fragile paper protection could shatter at any moment. Still, for this one breath of time, they were free. The girl lay curled in Daniel's arms as Marek prepared more forged papers on the desk. Her body was light, her face pressed against his chest. Her glowing eyes closed at last. Exhaustion had stolen her fear for a little while, and her breathing came soft and steady. Daniel sat still, holding her as if she might vanish if he let go. His rough hand brushed her tangled silver hair, untangling it slowly. Every small movement reminded him of his own daughter, long lost. The pain of memory was sharp, yet somehow it felt softened now, as if this child's presence healed something broken in him. Marek glanced at them from across the room, his eyes unreadable. You know this is dangerous, he muttered. One day pretending can turn into a lifetime of running. Daniel looked down at the girl, his voice low. Then I will run for a lifetime, he said. Marek shook his head. You've always been too stubborn to survive long, Daniel, but maybe too stubborn to die as well. The girl stirred, her fingers tightening around Daniel's sleeve. Her voice was a whisper, weak but clear. Father, are you still here? Daniel's chest tightened. Yes, I'm here, he answered gently. Her glowing eyes opened, soft and shining in the dim light. For a moment, fear was gone, and in its place was something fragile and beautiful: trust. She sat up slowly, her thin shoulders trembling under his coat. I had a father once, she said softly, before the war. Before the soldiers took him, he used to carry me on his shoulders. He used to sing when I was scared. When they took him, no one came back. And I was alone. Her voice cracked, and she hid her face in her hands. Daniel's heart burned with anger at the cruelty of it all. He pulled her hands gently away and pressed her small fingers against his chest. You are not alone now, he said, his voice steady. As long as I breathe, you have me. The girl's tears fell silently, but she smiled through them. One day, she whispered, you are my father. Daniel looked into her eyes and realized something deep he had meant to pretend. But now, it no longer felt like pretending. For this day, for this child, he was a father again. Marek finished stamping the last paper and set it aside. Here, he said, this will get you through the gates if luck is on your side. It says you are traveling for work with your daughter, but remember, soldiers look for weakness. If they sense fear, if they sense lies, they will tear it apart. Daniel nodded, his jaw set like iron. I will not let them doubt, he said. The girl tugged at his arm, her voice soft but strong. They will believe us because I believe you. Her words were simple, yet they carried more weight than any forged seal. For one day, trust was enough to fight fear. Outside, faint light began to touch the sky. The city groaned as patrols shifted and gates prepared to close for inspection. Marek opened the back door, leading them into the narrow alleys. "Go now," he said. "The guards change at dawn. That is your only chance." Daniel placed the girl on her feet, holding her hand tight. She walked beside him. Her small steps brave, though her legs still trembled. They reached the outer streets, where people gathered in quiet lines. Families stood together. Mothers clutching children. Fathers carrying bags. Daniel pulled the girl closer, his arm around her shoulders. To anyone watching, they looked like a father and daughter waiting for their turn, yet inside, his heart pounded with every passing second. The line moved slowly toward the gate. Soldiers checking papers one by one. Daniel could feel the girl's hand trembling in his. He knelt quickly and whispered, "Remember, look at me, not them. Hold my hand. Smile if you can. Be strong." She nodded, her glowing eyes wet but determined, when she whispered back. Her words pierced him like light in the dark. "As long as you hold me, I am not afraid." Their turn came, the soldier's visor scanning them. "Papers," the guard barked. Daniel handed them over, his face calm, his hand never leaving the girl's. The soldier read slowly, suspicion in his stance. Then his eyes dropped to the girl. She pressed herself into Daniel's side, whispering just loud enough for the guard to hear, "Father, when will we eat? I'm so hungry." The words were small, innocent, but perfect. The guard's visor flickered. His suspicion softened. He handed the papers back without another word, waving them through. Daniel exhaled slowly, guiding the girl forward as the gates opened. For the first time since the night began, freedom lay just beyond. They stepped out into the pale morning light. The girl looked up at him with tired but shining eyes. "We passed," she whispered, as if she could not believe it. Daniel squeezed her hand. "Yes, we passed." Her smile was weak, but real. Her face glowing with hope for the first time, the bond they had shared for survival. For one desperate night had become something deeper. For her, it was never pretend. For him, it was no longer a burden. The day had begun. And though danger still waited beyond the walls, for this one day, maybe more. They were father and daughter, not by blood, but by choice, by courage, by love found in the ruins. The gates closed behind them with a heavy clang, and the city of ruins faded into the mist. Daniel and the girls stood outside, where the land stretched wide and broken under the pale sky. The air smelled of ash and damp earth, but it was fresher than the suffocating streets they had escaped. For a moment, Daniel only breathed, his chest heavy with both relief and worry. They had passed the test, but the road ahead was still full of danger. The girl slipped her small hand into his, her glowing eyes watching the horizon. Her voice was soft, full of wonder. "We are free now, aren't we, Father?" Daniel looked down at her, his rough face softening. "Free for today," he said quietly. "Tomorrow we will fight again, but today?" "Yes, we are free." She smiled, and the light of dawn caught her silver hair, making it shine like threads of fire. Her thin body was still weak, her steps unsteady, but there was hope in her eyes now, a hope Daniel had not seen when she whispered. To him in the dark street, that hope filled his chest with a warmth he thought he had lost long ago. They walked across the broken plain. Avoiding the patrol roads, Daniel guided her through tall grass and abandoned houses, his eyes always scanning for danger. Every sound in the distance made him tighten his grip on her hand, but the girl did not flinch anymore. She walked beside him with trust. Every time the wind howled, she whispered, "It's all right, "Father is here," as the sun rose higher. They reached a small stream, its water clear and cold. Daniel knelt, filling his flask, and let the girl cup her hands to drink. She laughed softly when the water spilled down her chin, the sound light and pure. For a heartbeat, Daniel forgot the war, the soldiers, the fear in that laugh. The world felt alive again. He sat beside her on the grass, his coat wrapped around her thin shoulders. She leaned against him, whispering, "I thought I would never see the morning again. But you brought me here. You stayed." Daniel's throat tightened, his voice low. "You gave me a reason to stay?" She looked up at him, her glowing eyes shining. "Do you ever miss your real family?" she asked gently. Daniel's face darkened, his gaze falling to the water. "I had a daughter once," he admitted, his voice rough. "She was taken from me when the war began. I searched, I fought, but I never found her again. I thought my heart was empty forever." He paused, looking at the girl beside him. "Until you whispered to me, until you asked me to be your father." The girl pressed her small hand against his chest. "Right, where his heart beat strong. Then maybe your daughter sent me to you," she whispered, her voice trembling but full of belief. Daniel closed his eyes, the weight of her words pressing deep into him. He did not answer, because part of him wanted to believe it was true. The day stretched on, and danger followed in whispers. Once they heard soldiers in the distance, once they saw smoke from burning fields. But they kept walking, step by step, hand in hand. The girl grew tired, and Daniel lifted her onto his shoulders. Just as he had once carried his own child, she laughed again, the sound carrying across the ruined land. "You are tall, Father," she said. "I can see the whole world from here." Daniel smiled, something rare and real. "Then keep watching, little one, keep watching for both of us," as the sun began to set. They reached the edge of a forest. The trees rose tall, their leaves glowing gold in the fading light. Daniel found a hollow beneath the roots of an old oak, a place hidden and safe. He built a small fire, the smoke rising soft into the sky. The girl curled beside him, her head resting against his arm. "Father," she whispered sleepily, her voice soft as the wind, "do you promise you won't leave me tomorrow?" Daniel looked at her, his heart heavy and full at the same time. He brushed her silver hair from her face, his voice steady. "I promise, tomorrow. And the day after, and as long as I live." Her lips curved into a faint smile as sleep took her small body finally at peace. Daniel sat awake long into the night, watching the stars appear one by one. He thought of his lost daughter, of all he had failed, of all he had endured. But then he looked at the sleeping girl beside him, her hand still holding his coat, and he knew fate had given him something he thought was gone forever. Not blood, not name, but family. The dawn rose again, brighter than before, painting the sky in fire and gold. The girl opened her glowing eyes and whispered, "Good morning, Father." Daniel smiled, lifting her into his arms. "Good morning, little one," he said, his voice strong. Together they stepped into the light, no longer abandoned, no longer afraid, for in a world of ruins, a human and an alien child had found the one thing stronger than war. They had found family.